Alright, to pull the intake back, I took off the crankcase hose, unplugged the intake Vanos solenoid. I'm gonna have to pop this hose off here, and I have to take the injector rail off, and these are the post-cat O2 sensor connections. These are gonna pop off, and I'm gonna leave those connected for now. So I wanna label everything. These have to come off too. These just squeeze and slide off, just like this. Squeeze and pop off. Now, I can leave the injectors in the intake manifold, but I do have to get this rail off. There's these tabs right here, this like clip. It's kind of like the hose clips, but you have to get in there with the pick and actually just slide them off on both sides so it's below, just like that right there. If you guys can see that. See how I move that clip over? I do the same thing with the other side. And if you have a pick and some patience, you can get these. You don't want to lose these though, because they only come free with the whole harness. Alright, so all those clips are off. And the first thing to do is to find and recover all of these little tabs. And I just like to put them back on. See that right there? They face that way. And that's the lock. See, this one came off, this one came off, that one came off, so I have to find all of those. And that one still didn't pop off. There we go. And that one's still on. And we've got to disconnect here too. Is on the injector. Alright, so that's good news. I didn't lose any of them. And I always immediately install them. Alright, this faces this way. Because when you put the harness back on, it's exactly that. It just pushes into place and these clip in. So as long as these are in place, it's a plug and play at that point. Hey everyone, continuing repairs on the Z3. We're taking the intake off. You have to remove the dipstick tube bolt, which is a 13 millimeter, way down here under the harness. So I already have it loose, and you can see it gives me a little bit of slack. So just with that 13 removed, it does give you quite a bit of space. You can take it out. I would recommend leaving it in. We'll check to see if we have enough room to get this out. I think we will. There are some vacuum lines on the side. There's the solenoid under here for the secondary air vacuum line that runs over to the side over there. That has to get disconnected. And then there's some harnesses that are attached by some zip ties. We have to disconnect that as well. So for better access, I took the suction jet line here that goes to the brake booster off, which this can come down. We have this hose here, and under here we have another vacuum line right here, and then we have the connection for the solenoid for the secondary air solenoid, which is right there. So all of these, I have to take my intake nuts off. They can fall down, so it's good to have a magnet handy. These are 11 millimeter nuts. After you remove all of the nuts from here, there's one more hidden one down under here. So you're not going to be able to pull the intake off until you take the 16 that's down underneath where the throttle goes, right against the block. And it is good to have a swivel, because even though it looks like a direct shot, it's kind of hard to get to. Right down there is the stud, and here is the 16. Need to make sure I have the crankcase separator hose off. Hopefully at this point, if we get anything, I can pull the intake back. You know, I'm remembering I have to do the crossover pipe that runs under the intake manifold that goes for the heater core because of this failure, because that can be full of condensate. So with the intake pulled back, there's some connections you can get actually from this side now. You have to get the engine coolant temp sensor, which is right down there, right here. So I unplug that. The knock sensor connections are down here, so you have to pop those off. And then you just have to finagle all your other connections so you can actually just lift out the intake manifold. So I have my purge valve right here, and this is kind of trapping everything to come apart. I can leave part of it attached to the intake manifold, but for here, there's this press tab. The press tab is actually the tool you need to release the connection like that. It actually, kind of funny, comes with the tool you need. So just make sure you don't lose that, and that stays locked on that hose. Now that that's free, gives me some more space. I do have that sensor wire. Now the intake cam sensor wiring is connected to the front of the harness down here, so you unplug it, and then you can pull this out and around, and then you just have to feed it back down after when you plug it back in when you reinstall it. So now that I have the intake kind of at an angle, it gives you access back here. Another vacuum line for the secondary air right here. There's the engine temperature sensor right there. So the wiring goes in between the hard hoses for the fuel rail. So I have to sneak that through. And then I have the connections of the fuel, which are the quick connect, where you have to kind of push them forward and push them back at the same time to release the press tabs. I'll show you once I get that out. They give you so much space. Yep, there's one. That's it. There's fuel. Very nice. All right, I think I got everything. So now I just took the ignition harness and flipped it over this way. There's another vacuum line on the back. The fuel lines are off, and the intake is removed. And we'll take a look at the connections on the intake and what we can see under here in just a minute. All right, so here's the intake. This hose didn't need to come off, so I'm gonna pop that back on because that wasn't a hose that was restricting me. That goes down there. Here's the cyclone separator here. So it is actually a good idea if you do take your intake off, replace your cyclone separator. So I'm gonna be replacing that, absolutely. You can see your venturi for your brake booster is connected to the intake right here through this grommet. Here's my gaskets, obviously my injectors. If I turn it this way, we can take a look at the mess that was over here. So you have, this is a cap that leaks right here. So this one can fail. That can be an unmetered air leak. That's really hard to find just from age. Then you have your two vacuum ports. We had one, actually it might have been, I don't think it was that one. We had, well, actually it might have been that one. So I actually didn't need to touch that one, but that's okay, right? So then I had this one here that I had to get off. This is the solenoid. So this is the vacuum supply to the solenoid that controls the non-return valve of the secondary air. Hopefully everyone understood that. If you know about secondary air, you would understand what that is. Secondary air heats the exhaust up. On the first start, it injects oxygen into the exhaust. You have a secondary air pump, and that heats up your catalytic converter to reach closed loop faster. Okay, so that's really it for here. This was the holder for the fuel rail, and I just had to push it right here to pop that free to get that out. Now that that's the intake, not really much to it. It wasn't really that bad to get out. Let's take a look at the engine side. All right, this is what it looks like with the intake manifold removed. And here's the harness. Obviously that's the injection harness. I'm gonna move that out of the way. This was the engine coolant temperature sensor buried up under the intake manifold. We have our intake, our fuel pressure supply, and our return. So I'm going to tuck the return down under there, leave the supply out so it's easier to remember which is which. Both can be installed. You can install that backwards. Here's the starter motor. This is where I would check my voltage supply from my main 12-volt battery. And then you have your solenoid activation wire, which is this black one right here. When the EWS releases the signal and the DME says the rolling code is good, it will send power to the solenoid right here, which will then activate the solenoid and then supply power to go ahead and throw out the starter motor. To turn the engine over, this is your knock sensor connector right here. This is that coolant pipe that I need to replace. It looks like my Vanos line is leaking, so now's the time to do that also with the intake removed. So remember I was saying that stuff can get into the intake whenever you pull it back. So it's always a good idea to look inside here. Let's see which one I got on. You can see there is some dirt that's gotten into there, so you want to blow that out. And this one actually is the worst one. There's some debris in there. So it might not damage your engine, but even though I clean this really well, there's still debris that has gotten in. So I would want to blow that out with air. But in this case, since the cylinder head is coming off and it's going to get new valve seals and they're going to get lapped, it doesn't really matter for me to clean them right now. So the next step is to take the valve cover off and then take the Vanos system apart, including the timing mechanism for the Vanos, and then remove the cylinder head.